Flooded roads, bridges washed out, dispatch ordering him to turn back. But veteran trucker Nate Collier refused to leave behind 18 tons of life-saving medicine. For 3 days, he fought mud, storms, and exhaustion, until the governor himself heard what he'd done. Would you have had the courage to keep going? The rain had already begun before Nate Collier left the Kansas City yard, but forecasts didn't scare him. In his 58 years, storms were a constant companion, whether on dusty convoys during the Gulf War or in 20 years of hauling freight through America's heartland. His Kenworth W900 roared steady beneath him, 18 tons of critical medical supplies locked tight in the trailer, antibiotics, surgical gear, and most importantly, insulin bound for the Clearwater Children's Hospital. The urgency was printed across the bill of lading in red. Deliver by Friday, and no exceptions. As he steered onto Interstate 49, the sky collapsed into sheets of water. Wipers swiped furiously, barely holding back the blur. He turned up the CB radio, but the static was thicker than the rain. Every so often a distant voice cracked through, warning of closures ahead, overturned rigs, or highways swallowed by floodwater. Nate pressed his lips together. He'd seen chaos before. Supply runs in Kuwait where the difference between life and death was whether you moved forward despite the odds. This wasn't war, but to those kids in Clearwater, it might as well be. By evening, dispatch pinged him through the in-cab system. All routes blocked south of Clinton. Seek shelter. Do not proceed. The message repeated twice, urgent, final. Nate stared at the blinking cursor. He could picture the office staff, safe in dry buildings, reading updates from State Patrol. They didn't know the faces of the children who would be waiting on this load. They didn't know what it meant when insulin ran out. He tapped the wheel, debating. The safe call was to obey, to park at the next truck stop and wait 3 days for the storm to pass. But the word wait sat wrong in his chest. He thought of his younger brother, who hadn't lived to see 30 because the VA took too long to deliver medication. Nate had promised himself at that funeral that he would never again be the man who arrived too late. The first night fell hard. Rain hammered the windshield like bullets on glass. Nate pulled off onto an old county road, unmarked on his GPS but faintly traced on the worn paper atlas he kept in the glove box. He trusted those maps more than any satellite signal. 10 miles in, the asphalt gave way to gravel, then to dirt, then to muck. He stopped before the engine could sink further. Shutting off the rig, he reclined in the driver's seat, trying to rest. Sleep was impossible, thunder shaking the cab as rain streaked the mirrors. Between fits of dozing, his mind drifted to the hospital he was bound for. Clearwater Children's wasn't just another dot on his route log. He remembered delivering there 2 years back, dropping off beds and surgical tools. The staff had greeted him like family, one nurse even hugging him for carrying the load through snow. He pictured her face now, Evelyn, her name was, always calm, always composed. He wondered if she was on duty this week, and whether she was looking at empty shelves, praying that this shipment would arrive. By dawn, Nate climbed down from the cab to survey the road. His boots sank ankle-deep in sludge. Behind him, the trailer loomed, streaked with mud, its weight pressing the wheels into the soft ground. He tried to gun it forward, but the drive tires only spun, spraying muck. He cursed under his breath. The storm had turned the county road into a pit. The horizon showed the silhouette of a farmhouse, maybe a mile off. Nate locked the cab and trudged through wet fields, his jacket plastered to his back. Every step squelched. By the time he reached the yard, an elderly man in overalls was already watching from the porch, coffee mug in hand. "Truck stuck?" the farmer called. Nate nodded, too tired to offer much else. The man smiled faintly. "Name's Luther. Let's see if the old tractor's still got some fight in it." Within half an hour, the two men were back at the rig. Luther maneuvered his rusted John Deere into position, chains clanking. The engine wheezed but held steady as the tractor strained against the weight. Inch by inch, the Kenworth lurched free, mud sucking at its tires before finally releasing. Nate exhaled. "I owe you. Just pay me in conversation," Luther said, wiping sweat from his weathered brow. "It's been quiet around here since the storms cut the town off. Clearwater's hospital. Heard they lost power last night. Folks can't even reach it now. The words landed heavy. It wasn't just closed roads, it was a full isolation. Every hour mattered more than ever. Over black coffee, Luther spoke of his late wife and stranded neighbors. Nate listened, reminded of nights in deployment where coffee and conversation kept men steady. When the rain eased, Nate shook Luther's hand firmly. "I'll get through. One way or another." Luther's eyes softened. "Then Godspeed, son. Those kids are counting on you." Back in the cab, Nate scribbled a note in his logbook. Not for the company, but for himself. Never quit. Not this run. By afternoon, fuel was running low. He diverted toward a small gas station he remembered from years back. Pulling into the gravel lot, he saw the place was dark. No lights, no hum of pumps. The sign creaked in the wind. He sighed, ready to move on, until the door swung open and a familiar voice called his name. "Nate Collier? Haven't seen you in ages." It was Melina, the station's owner, her hair tied back, eyes tired but warm. She explained the power had been out for days, pumps useless. Still, she ushered him inside, handing him a towel and a steaming bowl of soup she'd managed to heat over a gas burner. "You've got that look," she said, reading the exhaustion in his face. "Another impossible run?" He chuckled weakly. 18 tons of medicine, and nowhere left to fuel. Melina disappeared into the back and returned with 2 red jerry cans. "Saved these for emergencies. My boy had type 1 diabetes when he was little. I know what that insulin means. You're not turning back, Nate. Not while I've got fuel to spare." Her words steadied him more than the diesel. As he poured the lifeline into his tanks, he thought of how many strangers had already played a part in this journey. Farmer, a widow running a lonely gas station, people who asked for nothing in return except that he keep going. Night was falling again, the storm unrelenting. Nate tightened his grip on the wheel. Dispatch would still be waiting for his check-in, still expecting him to follow orders. But the truth was clear in his mind. There was no turning back. He was already too far in. The road ahead was mud, floodwater, and uncertainty, but also the only path left to keep his promise. The second morning broke gray and swollen with mist. Nate had slept no more than 2 hours, head against the steering wheel, listening to the ticking of cooling metal after shutting the engine down to save fuel. Every joint ached as he climbed back into the seat, cranking the Kenworth to life. The diesel coughed, then steadied. Ahead, the county road narrowed into winding hills, where runoff water cut trenches into the dirt. The asphalt detours he once trusted were gone, washed out or barricaded with blinking signs he ignored. He was running blind now, following the faintest lines on his atlas and gut instinct. A hollow voice crackled over the CB. "Bridge south of Dry Creek gone. Trucks turning back." Then static. He tried to reply, but his words vanished into white noise. He was alone again. By mid-morning, the road turned into a climb, slick with mud that pulled at the tires. Nate downshifted, coaxing the Kenworth inch by inch until the trailer crested the ridge. On the far side, his heart sank. The valley below was a shallow lake, floodwaters swallowing farmland, fences poking out like broken bones. The county highway he needed shimmered beneath a foot of water. No way through. He pulled over near an abandoned shed to study the map. That's when a sound broke through the storm, the distant whine of a dirt bike. Out of the fog rode a lanky teenager in a poncho, helmet visor streaked with rain. The boy pulled up beside the cab, cutting the engine. "You the guy hauling medicine?" the kid shouted. "Heard on the scanner last night." Nate leaned out the window. "That's me." "Why?" "Name's Tommy. My uncle's a volunteer firefighter. Said if anyone tries to get to Clearwater, this trail's the only shot." He pointed toward a rough track skirting the woods, barely wide enough for a pickup, let alone an 18-wheeler. "I can guide you." It was reckless. The road was likely unmaintained, rutted with mud. But Nate saw something in the kid's eyes, determination mixed with fear. He reminded him of the new recruits he'd once trained overseas, too young to carry so much responsibility, yet carrying it anyway. "All right," Nate said, shifting into gear. "Show me the way." Tommy rode ahead, weaving through puddles, waving signals with his arm. The trail jolted the rig, trees scraping, tires nearly lost in the muck before momentum dragged it through. Then came the hill. Rain turned the slope into a chute of clay. Tommy stopped at the top, waving nervously. Nate gritted his teeth and dropped into low gear. The Kenworth's engine thundered, wheels spinning, mud spraying like cannon fire. Halfway up, traction gave out, the rig sliding backwards. Nate slammed the brakes, heart hammering, until the tires bit again. He feathered the clutch, coaxing the truck one crawling foot at a time. The roar echoed through the woods as the headlights cut across dripping branches. Finally, the rig broke free onto level ground. When he stepped out to breathe, Tommy pulled up, eyes wide. "Man, I thought you were gone." Nate let out a strained laugh. "If this truck's still breathing, so am I." At a clearing, Tommy shared a granola bar and spoke of his absent father and overworked mother. Nate listened, the boys' chatter distracting him from the ache in his shoulders. He didn't promise anything, he wasn't the type, but he knew he'd remember Tommy's help long after this run. By late afternoon, Tommy pointed him toward a service road that rejoined the highway. They shook hands, Nate pressing a few crumpled bills into the boy's palm, which Tommy tried to refuse. "You earned it," Nate insisted. The dirt bike sputtered away, swallowed by trees, leaving Nate alone once more. Fuel was down to a quarter tank. Darkness loomed, and with it came the gnawing worry that the Kenworth wouldn't see morning. He pushed on until the glow of a town flickered in the distance. But when he arrived, the streets were deserted. Sandbags lined storefronts, windows boarded, the sheriff's cruiser parked lifeless at the curb. At the town square, he found a small church with its doors open. Inside, a handful of people huddled in the pews, lanterns flickering. A volunteer waved him in. They offered hot coffee brewed over a propane stove, and he sat for the first time in hours, listening as townsfolk spoke of bridges gone, roads cut off, farms underwater. "Clear water?" Nate asked. A nurse among them shook her head. "No word since yesterday. They were already short on insulin. If you've got medicine headed there, you don't stop." The weight in her words was heavier than any dispatch order. Nate nodded. He couldn't stay. Not while children's lives were measured in hours. As night swallowed the town, he returned to his rig, the church lights fading behind him. He drove into darkness with rain streaking the windshield, every mile harder than the last. The CB was silent. Fuel was thinning. And yet, in his chest, a stubborn fire burned. He was moving forward, toward a hospital that might already be out of hope, but still waiting for him. The third day began with a bitter chill. Nate woke stiff in the cab, his breath fogging the windshield. He had left the church town behind in darkness, pressing the Kenworth onto another service road that twisted like a snake through wooded hills. His muscles ached as though the storm had settled inside him. His hands cramped from gripping the wheel too long. The truck wheezed with fatigue, and so did he, both man and machine staggering forward together. The rain hadn't stopped. Water gushed from the hillsides, carving gullies across the road. Branches littered the asphalt, snapping under his tires. Twice he had to climb out in the downpour to drag debris aside with raw hands. The old paper atlas on his passenger seat was blotched and curling from the damp. According to its faded lines, Clearwater was still 60 miles south, but every mile felt like a war zone. Mid-morning, the engine coughed. It was subtle at first, a hiccup when he shifted gears, but then it sputtered again, the dashboard needles twitching. He cursed under his breath and eased onto the shoulder. Rain hammered the hood as he popped it open. Steam and grit rose into his face. The filter was clogged with wet leaves and sludge kicked up from the forestry trail. He rummaged through his kit. No mechanic's shop here, no tools but what he carried. He stripped the filter bare with shaking hands, scraping muck away with a rag, blotting it with paper towels. He wrapped a length of duct tape across a split in the intake hose. When he turned the key again, the engine grumbled, then caught. Relief washed over him. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would keep him moving. Hours blurred together. He forced down crackers, drank tepid water from a bottle, and kept driving. But the storm had no mercy. At the bottom of a ravine, he found the road blocked by a fallen power line, sparking faintly in the water that pooled across the asphalt. Turning back was impossible. He sat in silence, staring at the wires, rain pounding the glass. His eyes shifted to the side ditch, where a narrow dirt track ran parallel to the road. It looked abandoned, washed out in places, but it bent around the ravine. Nate gunned the Kenworth forward, teeth clenched as the tires sank deep into the mud. The cab jolted violently. He wrestled the wheel, mud spraying up past the windows. For a terrifying second, he thought the trailer would tip, but the rig clawed back onto level ground. Behind him, the dirt track collapsed in a slide, erasing the path. He had threaded through with seconds to spare. Meanwhile, in Clearwater, Nurse Evelyn braced herself for the worst. She had been on her feet for 30 hours, moving between beds, checking glucose monitors, doling out the last fragments of insulin. Parents begged her for more. Children cried as needles pricked their skin. She hated what she had to do, cutting doses in half, choosing which cases could not wait another hour. As she capped another syringe, she thought of her own nephew back in St. Louis, a boy the same age as one of her patients. She whispered his name under her breath, as if reminding herself who she was fighting for. In the break room, she scrawled notes to herself on the whiteboard. Call supply chain again. Contact highway patrol. Each attempt hit the same wall. No word from the truck. Back on the road, Nate's strength began to falter. He could feel it in his wrists, in the heaviness of his eyelids. The cab reeked of damp clothes and diesel. Memories of convoys in Kuwait returned. Men pressing on because turning back meant others wouldn't survive. He gripped the wheel harder. This was his convoy now. By late afternoon, he crested a hill and saw, far off, the faint outline of Clearwater. The hospital's rooftops poked above the mist like a promise. But between him and that town stretched the swollen banks of the Cedar River. The bridge that crossed it was still standing, but water lapped against its decking, rushing in brown torrents beneath. He idled at the approach, staring at the flood. The current surged fast, carrying whole logs downstream. The bridge was not meant for 18 tons of steel and cargo. But there was no other way. His fuel gauge was near empty. If he turned back now, he'd never reach another station. He stepped onto the bridge, water ankle-deep, the structure groaning but holding. He looked back at the Kenworth, headlights glowing through the downpour, trailer looming like a shadow of responsibility. His breath came sharp. He climbed back into the cab, shifted into gear, and whispered, "Easy, girl. Just one more stretch." The Kenworth rolled forward. Water surged against the wheels, the trailer swaying with the current. The bridge moaned under the strain. Nate's heart pounded, hands slick on the wheel. Halfway across, a wave splashed over the hood, and for a moment the engine sputtered. He feathered the clutch, coaxing her onward. The headlights shook, the wipers screamed. Then the front tires climbed onto dry ground. Inch by inch, the trailer followed until, with a final groan of steel, the rig cleared the bridge. Nate pulled over just past the crossing, shutting off the engine, chest heaving. He pressed his forehead against the wheel, rainwater dripping from his hair. Relief touched him, but faintly, like the edge of dawn before sunrise. Clearwater was close now. The hospital was waiting, clinging to hours he barely had left to give. He restarted the Kenworth, the engine rattling but alive, and pointed the headlights toward the town. The final push had begun. By the time Nate rolled through the last stretch of road into Clearwater, night was pressing in, thick and wet. The storm had not broken, but the fury of it seemed to soften, as though the skies themselves had spent their strength. His Kenworth W900 rattled with every mile, engine coughing from the punishment of mud, water, and makeshift repairs. Diesel fumes lingered sharp in the cab. His arms were heavy, but his eyes locked on the low cluster of lights ahead, the hospital. The parking lot was half submerged, floodwater glinting under the dim glow of emergency lamps. Nate eased the truck into the bay where ambulances should have been, the tires hissing as they cut through water. The brakes shrieked, and the rig shuddered to a halt. For a moment he sat motionless, hands fixed to the wheel, chest heaving. Then the hospital doors burst open. Nurses in raincoats and plastic gowns rushed out, voices raised over the storm. A team of orderlies sloshed through the water with carts and stretchers. "The insulin's here," someone shouted. The words rang like a bell through the night. Nate opened the door, stumbling down from the cab. His boots hit the water, splashing mud up his legs. He barely felt it. Exhaustion buckled his knees, but he unlocked the trailer, swinging open doors to reveal the pallets. The medical team surged forward, unloading with desperate speed. Boxes of antibiotics, surgical kits, and finally, the insulated crates of insulin were pulled out with reverent care. One nurse wept openly as she lifted a case, whispering, "We're not too late." Parents appeared in the doorway, some crying, some clutching children wrapped in blankets. The relief was visible, like a dam breaking inside every chest. Nate sank down onto the curb, mud streaking his jacket, rainwater streaming off his hair and beard. He watched in silence as the supplies disappeared into the hospital. He had nothing left to give. His body shook with fatigue. A young man, one of the junior doctors, knelt beside him. "You saved them," he said simply. "You saved all of them." Someone snapped a photo. The grizzled veteran trucker, drenched and slumped against the curb, the towering trailer behind him, and the floodlit hospital doors in the background. That single image would carry farther than the truck itself ever could. Inside, Evelyn wasted no time. Vials of insulin were unpacked, doses drawn, and children treated within minutes. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind replayed the choices she had made the night before, deciding which child would receive the final drops. The memory tightened her chest. Now, surrounded by full boxes, the release came as both relief and grief. She pressed her palm to the counter, whispering a quiet promise never to forget the faces of those who had waited. There was no room for celebration, only steady, urgent work. Hours later, when she finally paused to sip water, she noticed the photo of Nate on her phone. Someone had shared it already, and comments poured in. "Hero. This man deserves a medal. Find him." By dawn, the photo had spread across Missouri. Local news stations called it "the truck that wouldn't quit." Truckers reposted it on CB forums. Parents of diabetic children shared it on Facebook with tearful gratitude. By mid-morning, the governor's office had already been alerted. Nate, meanwhile, had stretched out in the loading bay, using his jacket as a pillow, catching the first real sleep in 3 days. When he woke, the rumble of rotor blades shook the loading bay. A helicopter settled onto the flooded parking lot, its searchlight cutting through the mist. 2 men in state emergency uniforms approached, and behind them stepped the governor of Missouri himself, boots splashing in the water. He removed his raincoat hood and extended his hand. "Mr. Collier," he said, his voice steady despite the storm, "your refusal to quit when others would have turned back has saved lives. On behalf of this state, and every parent who will hug their child tonight, thank you. You will be awarded the Medal of Civilian Valor." Nate lowered his head slightly, rough hands clasped before him. Medals didn't matter much to him anymore. He'd seen enough pinned to uniforms, some earned, some handed out too late. But this one, it wasn't about politics. It was about insulin delivered, children saved, and a promise kept. He gave a small nod. "I just couldn't leave those kids waiting." The aftermath rippled outward. Luther, the farmer who had hauled him free with an aging tractor, was interviewed by a local paper. "Didn't think I was helping anyone important," he said, chuckling softly. "Turns out I helped a hero." Donations poured into his county to repair roads and restore power. Melina's gas station became a symbol, too. When word spread that she'd given away her emergency diesel, neighbors rallied to support her. A local nonprofit installed a generator so she'd never lose fuel in a storm again. Business, once a trickle, returned stronger than ever. And Tommy, the teenager with the dirt bike, found himself invited to a state technical school for logistics and mechanics. He rode up to Nate's rig a week later, grinning ear to ear. "Guess I might be a trucker after all," he said. Nate ruffled his hair, too tired to say much, but his smile said enough. As for Nate, when the ceremonies ended and the press moved on, he did what he always did. He climbed back into his Kenworth and took to the road. The medal rested in the glove box, catching sunlight. The highway was enough, engine hum, horizon, and the knowledge that the world had finally seen what truckers carried, grit and honor. The storm had nearly broken him, but he had pushed through. As the Kenworth hummed back onto open highway, he knew he wasn't just hauling freight anymore. He was hauling the weight of every stranger who believed in him. This story reminds us that one man's refusal to quit can change the lives of thousands. What would you have done if you were in Nate's shoes? Turn back or press on? Let us know in the comments. And if this journey moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories of honor, grit, and the road that shapes us. See you in the next video.